1. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Circle City Podcast. I am your host, Sam Sinclair, and as always, joined with me is Jake. Jake, how you doing today, man?
Good.
And we've got a very special guest on today's show. We've got Yogi Roth of the Pac-12 Network, also the host of the Yogi Roth Show, How Great Is Ball? Yogi, how you doing today on this Mother's Day Sunday?
I'm good. I got mom and my wife all ready to roll. So I'll be cooking breakfast right after this for the whole family, man. But good to get to connect with you guys.
Yeah, you're California based, so it's real early for you, but we really appreciate you coming on. So, Yogi, we'll let you give the fans a little bit of background information about yourself. Tell us, how you came to work for the Pac-12 Network and how long you've been there, and just your general background information, because we're Indiana based, so we don't know a lot of your West Coasters.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you reaching out to us, man. I began my career in Pittsburgh. That's where I played. I played wide out at Pitt. I grew up in Pennsylvania. Ended up moving out to LA, coaching football at USC for a while. And when I left coaching, I started broadcasting, working for ESPN, for Fox. And when the Pac-12 Network started, I was like, man, this is a conference now I've come to know and fall in love with. It was the Pac-10 at the time. Let's roll. And got a chance there. And really fortunate to be there since the day we began. So we're heading into year 8 or 9, and they let me call all of our fun games and do all of our fun shows and get to collaborate with our entire crew, and most importantly, get to study the student athletes and study the game and celebrate it when appropriate. And for me, it's always appropriate to celebrate college football. So I'm excited to do that with you guys here today.
Yeah, and it's really cool. I got to listen to a few of your shows, and it's really cool how obviously you're there for the sports, but you cover some of the athletes when you get to interview them. You talk about off the field stuff. And I think, that's kind of what sets the difference between, guys, talking heads that, talk sports, but they also talk about off the field stuff. And I think that's really cool. And, you were able to interview Michael Pittman, Jacob Eason, and Julian Blackmon, 3 of, ironically, the Colts draft picks. And so that's why we got you on here. And we'll roll right into the Michael Pittman selection at 34. You got to interview him before the draft. What were some of your initial thoughts on when Pittman got selected to the Colts, and how do you feel he's going to fit with the Colts?
Well, I was ecstatic for him. He's a pro's pro. I talked to him about it in our interview, but the first day that I met him, and I do this all the time at every school I go to, is I stay late. I want to find out who's staying late, who's catching on the jugs, who's working on drop of their hips, who's whatever the position may be. How are you nuancing your craft? And he was staying after. And the only other guy that was staying late as he was Deontay Burnett. And Michael followed him. Deontay has been in the league the last couple of years. But Michael has always been a pro. And then when you got to meet him and a chance to talk to him, he was the same way. So I've been around him in pretty much every football setting, from working out with high school kids with the Elite 11 to watching him at practice at SC, or obviously on big stages like he was when he played. So when he got picked up, I was like, perfect spot, because everything I've heard about your head coach and your organization is that it's full of pros that allow guys to be themselves as long as it's not a detriment to the program. Fall in line, but also have a personality about him. You follow him on his YouTube page. He's not outlandish, but he's not a robot. And I think at the receiver position, the way football's going now, like, you got to be able to have a little bit of juice and be able to blur those lines. And I'm excited for him. I just think he's going to be a great fit. He's such a big-bodied player. And then, again, now look at who he gets to play with and learn from day one with Phillip Rivers. I mean, come on. You couldn't ask, if you're a wideout, to fall into, in my opinion, a better scenario.
Yeah, we couldn't agree more with that assessment. So kind of talk about his ascent at USC. I found his journey kind of interesting. His first 3 years, he was really a special team standout, right? 2017, he's all Pac-12 as a special teamer. And then 2019, he really burst onto the scene, 101 catches, 1,275 yards, 11 touchdowns. And if you compare that to his first 3 seasons, he had a combined 70 catches, 1,244 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Why do you think he was such a late bloomer?
Well, I think he just develops. Like, look, anybody can get numbers, right? I call it, you can play catch or you can play quarterback, right? Like, anybody can catch 80 balls if you got hands. I think what separated Michael wasn't just his numbers, but the way he's evolved. I mean, you go back and watch the Pac-12 title game, a couple of years ago with Sam Darnold. Michael Pittman's a big reason they win that game. So it's not like he didn't show up in big moments. Like his numbers, to your point, exactly don't mirror what he did in his final season. But it was just a consistent development thing with him. He played special teams as a freshman. He didn't complain and moan and do a lot of receivers do when they're doing that. He was like, okay, I get it. And his dad being an, I think, 11-year pro probably had something to do with that. Of like, you got to get in where you fit in. And Michael understood that. And you add in where he played wide receiver. USC has never been void of depth and NFL talent there. So there is an element of suitably waiting your turn. And then you just look at kind of what went on during his career, playing a true freshman quarterback 2 years ago. This year, freshman quarterback, or sophomore quarterback getting hurt, then freshman coming in. I mean, it's not as though he came up with Sam Darnold every year, right? Like, so he had to adjust and pivot and just lead. And I think he just did that. And then this year with the air raid, it allowed him to really flourish. When he saw man coverage, he was pretty much unstoppable. And then again, to the nuancing of the craft, you watch him and his body control. I'm not going to compare him to the best receiver I've ever been around, which is Larry Fitzgerald in the entirety, but how he uses his body late in routes, because he's so big and he's so strong. Like, it's kind of, think of like Shaq in basketball. Like, he would get called for fouls all the time because he'd flick somebody. Be a 6'4", 230-pound wideout. The same deal when you're going up against college DBs week in and week out. So he learned the ability of how to use his body and use his strength, and that allowed him to make all those plays down the field. And then his hand-eye, that's the thing that really probably grew the most in terms of being a strong catcher. He always had elite hands, but being a strong catcher in so much traffic and being, wanting to be that guy and then mirroring the strength. It was a beautiful example of somebody who comes back for a senior year and can put it all together versus someone who leaves early and is, half-finished product 3/4 of the way and struggles to be a fourth wide receiver in the NFL. I mean, Michael will come in and be able to be, I think, a number 2 guy and evolve into potentially a leading receiver in an organization.
So I'll ask you this real fast. Frank Reich compared him to Vincent Jackson. Do you think that's a pretty good comparison to Pittman?
Yeah, that's fair. I don't watch enough of Vincent Jackson to know, like, the nuances of his game, but just from like highlights and watching Sundays here and there, I can get down with that.
So, the Colts are really big about character, especially with all their people that they draft. They got Ed Dodds and Brian Decker that they got. Pittman seemed to fit that mold perfectly, given that he was a team captain and won Pop Warner Award, which is given to a standout collegiate player both on and off the field, and his reputation of being a leader in the locker room. Like I said, you got to interview him a couple months ago. Could you give the listeners some additional insight possibly into his rep and as a high character player and some other examples that you possibly gained from his reputation?
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that by example, Michael became the leader of that team. He's not the most vocal guy. When he has to, he needs to, but he showed up every day and to my point, stayed every day. And I think athletes at the end of the day, while we love YouTube speeches and viral videos, like, athletes can tell who's real and who's not. And you could tell pretty quick. And I think especially at USC, the challenge at SC in my lens is when you come in, you always have a ton of hype. And usually all the people that hype you up are around you because a lot of these kids are Southern California based. And then your reality does not mirror your, digital reality, as one might say, what people think you are on social media. That's a hard balance. And I think Michael was the guy to remind guys that no matter who you are when you come in, you got to work. And he's going to make, guys like Brew McCoy and Kyle Ford, who were also 5-star high school kids last year, he's going to make them understand what it takes to be great. So I just think in every level, whether it was adversity, whether it was a tough game, Michael was able to face the music, deal with it, and also provide an answer of like how we improve. And I go back to, his pedigree is one thing, but also his experience. I don't think that leadership is something you're born with. He was taught it through osmosis clearly. And then he saw it at SC and learned it from a guy like Kerry Colbert, his receiver coach. Again, I go back to that position. You guys need to come out and check it out, but you go to a practice at USC and it's loaded with the former wideouts. So I'm talking like from Keyshawn Johnson to Curtis Conway to Marquise Lee to Robert Woods. Like, you get the position. Like, you can't just be a guy that can play and can catch and can run and be respected by that group. Like it's way different. Most schools, like they don't have that pedigree at that position. I'd argue very few do. And I think when you come to SC, you see it so in your face because they're around you all the time that you know that you've never necessarily, in air quotes, arrived, and you go to work. And that's what Michael did, and that's who he's going to be in the league.
All right, so switch gears a little bit to the next Pac-12 player. They drafted Utah safety Julian Blackmon in the 3rd round. And Yogi, were you surprised that he fell as far as he did and that the Colts drafted him at that spot, given that there wasn't really a need at the position? Do you think there's kind of a reason that a team that maybe doesn't need a safety would pick him up?
Yeah, I was surprised he got picked as early as he did, actually, just because of the injury. You know, the injury was in the Pac-12 title game. And in our conversation, I think it was on Instagram TV, I'm literally watching it, and I'm standing behind him, and I'm like, oh, no, like he just collapses. And you guys know, like there's nothing worse than watching a senior get hurt in like a late season game, especially when they came back for a senior year like he did. And then a knee, you know, like my heart sunk, and I was like, I got it. Like one of my first thoughts was, oh no, like, is he going to get drafted? And even coming into the weekend, I didn't know, you know, I think all the projections this year were all out of whack anyway, but you never really knew where he was going to go. You know, so I was so happily and pleasantly surprised when I saw him get picked where he did, because he's that type of talent. You know, I was with him last year in spring when he made the change from corner to safety. I called, you know, a ton of his games in college, and I watched him in practice, and I was like, whoa. And another safety I used to get to watch all the time in practice was Earl Thomas. And he doesn't have the straight line speed Earl does, but the range that Julian has, that's what stood out to me. And then you add in the DBs he played with, right? It's Jalen Johnson. It's, you know, 4 guys. They all went to the league. You know, you look at that entire secondary, Terrell Burgess, you know, guys getting drafted. Really impressive. And you look at all the players he played with, you know, his freshman year, he was playing with, I'm blanking on his name, but Marcus Williams. You know, he was a safety back then when Marcus got hurt, and then he moves to corner. So he's had experience there, and then you get to know him. I mean, this is a 5th-year senior, total vet, total leader of a team, insane football nerd. And then everybody recovers now in rapid ways from knee injuries. So I was glad that the Colts made it. I thought it was like a relative steal pick, because his grade is definitely at the place he got drafted or even higher. But his injury would say that he should fall, and he didn't. And I was so happy to see that.
So why do you think he moved back to safety in 2019, and what kind of impact did that make with him going back to safety with one of the best defenses in college football and the Utah Utes?
Yeah, well, it was his call. It's a fun story. So their bowl game, you know, he knew they were losing 2 safeties to the league. You know, they had 2 thumpers, you know, Corian Ballard and the other guy went to the Seahawks last year. But they had 2 legit safeties 2 years ago. And he went in during bowl practice and asked Coach Whittingham, hey, can I move to safety next year? And Kyle said, like the thought, let's wait till after the bowl to go there. You know, let's focus on the game. So they did, and they talked after the bowl game, and it was a natural move for him. You know, when you project him in the league, because again, he's not like a 4-3, 4-4. He's not that guy at corner. And I just think personally his skill set's better suited there, because he's truly that quarterback on the field. You know, he can identify, diagnose. He's not afraid to fit the hole in the run game, and he can make plays on the ball. I mean, this is a guy who played a lot of offense in his career. Like, you know, he's got ball skills. You know, the phrase always thrown around is like, can you make a play in the secondary at the moment of truth? And this guy can thrive at the moment of truth. So I think that it was a perfect move. And then again, as I referenced, he started there. So it wasn't as though he had to learn a brand new position. You know, he began as a safety, moved to corner, played there for, I guess it would have been 3 years, and then slides back to his original position and probably his most natural at the deep safety.
All right, so we'll switch gears to the next guy. The Colts obviously drafted quarterback Jacob Eason. He was probably the most polarizing and shocking picks of the Colts draft. If anyone had heard Chris Ballard after day 2, he kind of threw out feelers that they probably weren't looking at quarterback very actively. Were you surprised that Jacob went in the 4th round?
No. I thought he was going to go a little earlier. I talked to coaches in the league week before the draft, and they were like, We think he's going in the first round, which surprised me. And then he didn't, and then he didn't. It was one of those things where you're like, okay, again, like it's such a weird year. I think the weird year hurt guys like Jacob Eason because he didn't get to go to visit with teams in person. He didn't get to go and showcase his personality. He didn't get to go and have personal workouts. Like you just had to watch an up and down senior or junior campaign, which is true. That offense was up and down. That offense was trying to figure out their own identity as the year went on. And for Jacob, he didn't win the job until the weekend before the first game. He was going to split time. I called their first game of the year. He was going to, share a little bit of time in that first game because it was so close. So he never has been able to just go into a season as a dude, as the guy, and thrive, and have ownership of it. So, to me, him going to the Colts was a little bit of a surprise. I talked to him the day before, and he goes, my career has been unpredictable. So this is just part of, the adversity that I deal with. It's no big deal. And that was a real mature approach, I thought. And then you say, wow, could he land here? And again, I go to every quarterback in the draft, from Herbert to Tua to Joe Burrow. Like I get Joe going to play at home, but the pressure on a number one pick, even a first round pick at that position, is so dramatically different. So for Jacob Eason, the former number one quarterback in high school in the country, number one player in high school in the country, he's never been able to just like sit in a room and be, I don't know, like a sponge. And now he gets to go do it. So I think it's the healthiest spot of all quarterbacks to come learn from Philip. He's only playing one more year based on like him being a high school coach or coach in waiting. So if that's real, he's going to sit behind one of the best. Another guy who's a total pro in the backup there, Brissett. So I'm really pleasantly happy for him. And to me, out of all the draft picks, I was most excited for him where he went.
Yeah, so like we said, Eason's kind of had a pretty crazy path to get to the NFL. He had to start at Georgia as a true freshman, got hurt, got benched for Jake Fromm, transferred back to Washington, had to sit going in for the transfer rules. How do you think that process molded him into the person and the player that he is now? And how do you feel like this is possibly damaged his draft stock going into this draft?
Well, I don't think it damaged him. I think it's his truth. If anything, look, most quarterbacks, if they don't play, they're gonna bolt for the most part. And a lot of times they bolt and they don't end up playing. Jacob was very it was easy to understand. It wasn't as though he had an issue with the coach or the team or he wasn't performing. Like he played, I think he was 8-5 as a freshman. Played, considerably for a freshman in that conference. I thought considerably well. It's completely, fish out of water coming from Seattle to Athens. And then as a sophomore, game one, he gets hurt by the chain gang. If you go back and watch that, like he's running out of bounds. It's not as though like he took a shot. Freakish injury. And then Jake Fromm leads him to the national title. And Jacob Eason, you could talk to Jake Fromm, you could talk to Kirby Smart. He was a rock star in the QB room. Did not do what a lot of guys do, which is, woe is me, let me be selfish. The opposite of that. And then just saw the writing on the wall. Like, Jake grew up in Georgia. Just let him do a natty. Like, pretty unlikely for me to go beat this guy out. There's politics involved in college football, and we all should agree upon that, as in every area of life. And there's nothing wrong with that. So he bolted. And truth be told, he should have never left. Should have never left the Pac-12 footprint. It's really hard for guys because of what I just referenced. That happens all over the country every year. So he comes back to the school he grew up going to games at. His story kind of became storybook, if you will. So I don't think his journey hurt him in any stretch. I think he went back and it sat, and then every day got to practice against Jimmy Lake, who's now the head coach's defense, learn in a completely different environment, which is sitting for him, and then go compete for a job. It wasn't like it was handed to him. There was a guy in Jake Kaner who was there for 3 years who had mastery of the system, and Jacob was still trying to figure it out, let alone having a new offensive coordinator. So I just think every one of those experiences took the raw talent that we all got to see since he was in high school getting a boatload of offers. It got molded and it dealt with adversity. And think of him now. He's matured. He's seasoned. And he gets to go learn. Great. I really don't think that his transferring, his bouncing hurt him at all. to be quite honest. I think if anything, it probably helped him, because I don't think anybody should go. And if it was me, quarterbacks wouldn't play as freshmen because they never get a pause in their life. They don't get a pause. If you talk to any quarterback, they would say, I don't get a pause until after my rookie year in the NFL from high school, because the hype is so intense. They finish college, they go pre-draft, all that work, they get drafted, they're all that hype, and then they're exhausted by the middle of their rookie year. Like, he gets to go and just take a breath when he gets there. And I think that is an incredible blessing at this position that is over scrutinized.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up about Jake Fromm kind of being a local hero. I have a lot of family that are Georgia fans, and they follow that. And a lot of people kind of bash Jacob for losing that job to Jake Fromm. And I don't feel like a lot of people take into account, Jake Fromm's local roots there. So I felt like that was good you brought that up. And that kind of transitions into the $1 million question about him. I'm sure you heard it extensively throughout the process about his character and work ethic. A lot of analysts, Chris Mortensen went on the draft and said that's why he fell. There are other people like Todd McShay that said, that he wasn't interviewing well. How did you take those reports? Did those surprise you? And do you feel like they're accurate, or was he kind of just a whipping boy throughout this process?
Well, look, I think there's a little bit of both. I've never met a reporter, and we're talking about Chris Mortensen here, who is a Hall of Famer, right? Nobody's going to say anything that they just made up in their head, especially when none of these guys spent any time with him. Like, Mo Kiper didn't spend any time with Jacob Eason. None of these guys did, A, due to the coronavirus, and B, due to not coming out to see him. So I think that there's elements there that I'm sure somebody told them something. But in my experience, which is all I could really go on, his character is rock star. Like, I have a photo on my desktop that I'm looking at now of like me and him and Jake Heaps working out when he was in the portal per se. And he was always been a seeker and a searcher in terms of the knowledge and trying to learn at the position. So I don't see that regarding not being a great interview. Yeah, he's not going to wow you. I would do production meetings on Fridays with our TV crew. He's not going to come in there and be Jake Fromm, in terms of his personality, or be Tua. But that's also not him. So I think there's something to, okay, maybe he didn't wow coaches in their initial Zoom interview with the, whatever, his personality, but he's a West Coast kid. He's got a laid back element to his vibe, but I don't believe that he's got a laid back element to how he works. You can talk to his teammates. They rave about him. They love him. He was a guy who always showed up, was always trying to learn more. Because remember, he knew it was at stake all season long, right? Which was, can I go to the draft? Can I be one and done, in terms of his playing eligibility? And I'm trying to learn a new offense. So, I talked to every coach on that staff. He never walked in the facility, kicked his feet up and said, okay, hand me the playbook. Like, he went to work in that regard. So I think he'll use that as fuel and motivation. And again, I go back to his head coach and the guys he's sitting next to. They will set the blueprint for him. And if he does have issues around work ethic, which I don't think he does, but if he does, he'll be out of the league. Like, it'll just happen. So I think that some of them were overblown. I think some of them were I don't think any of them were irresponsible, because I wouldn't count on two of the main guys in the history of NFL reporting to be irresponsible. But I think if it's non-corona and people get to know him, those things probably aren't said.
Well, Yogi, we really appreciate you coming on the show, man. For all listeners, you could find Yogi on Twitter at Yogi Roth. Make sure to check out his podcast, Yogi Roth, the Yogi Roth Show, How Great Is Ball. A lot of great interviews on that podcast. You got Matt Hasselbeck. There's a bunch of other ones that have been recently come out. So make sure you guys listen to that. You can get it wherever you listen to your podcast. And Yogi, really appreciate you coming on this morning.
Yeah, and if anybody's looking for those interviews with your newest Colts, just go to the Pac-12 Perspective podcast. All of them are on there. So if you're trying to dive into these guys a little bit, or if you have any questions about them, hit me up. I'm really excited for your city. What a great draft in terms of the West Coast and guys coming out to Indy. We're really looking forward to tracking them as their careers get going.
Yep, sounds good. So we appreciate you guys all listening, and make sure you guys, if you have any questions for Yogi, hit him up. I appreciate you guys coming on and listening to the show. We hope you guys have a good rest of the day.